Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our discussion about youth mental health first aid with Leon Leader Charge. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Jacob Matax and I provide technical assistance with TYRC. I'd like to start our conversation with a brief introduction of Mr. Leader Charge. We're excited to have him on board today to discuss this very important topic. Leon is an enrolled member of the Rosebud Sioux Tribe and part of the Oglala Sioux Tribe in Pine Ridge, South Dakota. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Addiction Studies from the University of South Dakota with an emphasis on treatment and prevention continuum and a Master of Arts in Interdisciplinary Studies with an emphasis in Educational Administration and Leadership in Addiction Counseling from the University of South Dakota Graduate School. He has experience in psychological first aid, co-occurring mental health disorders, the 12 core functions of substance abuse counselor, evidence-based practice, among many other topics. So again, thank you, Leon, for being here today. We're very excited about this conversation, this discussion, and we're looking forward to hearing more about the aforementioned topics. And now I'm going to hand the mic over to Ethylene Ironclad Two Dogs to open up our discussion.
Thank you so much, Jacob. And good morning, everybody. My name is Shina Ikikjumi Texirobleman, Ethylene Ironclad Two Dogs. I'm Oglala Lakota and also Crow, and I live in Porcupine, South Dakota. I'm a senior technical assistant specialist with the Tribal Youth Resource Center, Tribal Law and Policy Institute, and really appreciate all of you being here to discuss such a sensitive and important topic, especially particularly to our people, the Native Indigenous people. So I'm going to be opening, remembering all of our relatives, our families, our young people, our children. I'll be doing this opening in my Lakota language, and I ask that you also in your mind and your spirit and heart pray along with me. We all have struggles and challenges. We all have blessings, and I really appreciate that all of you are a blessing to our people. So with that, I'll do the opening. Tunkashila na unchi wopila tanka unkeni chaupile ampetuki wopila unkeni chaupi woash ake na woanglake. We chose ani unki ayapie tunkashila na taku iwongla kapi ki onya kapi hecho trecha wakaija iota wo ke ichupikte unshi unki lapie mitakuye oyasi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Auntie, for that beautiful opening. So we'll go on over to the next slide, please. So we got some learning objectives, and what we really want to concentrate on here is recognizing that a lot of the subjects and initiatives we'll talk about are evidence-based practices that assist in preventing suicide and have been measured, and the outcomes have been effective. And also participants will have an increased knowledge of cultural protective factors and how readiness to change are impactful in Indigenous communities. Participants will also have an increased knowledge of youth mental health first aid, a curriculum, and how to access this resource. I'm pretty excited about sharing these objectives. Definitely suicide is harmful on individuals, families, and communities. So we'll get going to the next slide, please. Suicide prevention evidence-based best practices. One of the leading evidence-based practices: question, persuade, and refer. And what happens in this training is you can go out, seek the training, or you can bring the training to the community and train the community on how to identify suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts, question lethal means if they have access to if they have ideation of doing suicide, then how their plan is to get to that point. You question that, you persuade them to think about not harming themselves, getting help, and going on to the referral process of actually going to get this individual to some professional help. One of the things about QPR that's really important is we're not therapists, we're not healers in the sense. We're more along the lines of someone who cares. And QPR is an excellent training. I've utilized it many times. It's safe to say I help with people in their suicidal ideation and trying to refer them on to some getting some help professionally. Applied suicide intervention skills training. ASSIST is also a program that's evidence-based and proven to be effective to reduce suicide in communities, individuals, families. It's a 2-day training program that teaches participants how to assist those at risk for suicidal thinking, behavior, attempts. Although many healthcare professionals use ASSIST, anyone 16 years or older can use the approach, regardless of professional background. ASSIST workshops cost money to attend, and then the cost varying by training site. But we're also at the end of this, the bullet point, we have found a resource that provides funding to get you these trainings for free. Safe Talk also is another a suicide prevention resource that helps individuals reach out to someone who needs to talk to someone to hopefully get some help. Sources of Strength is also a curriculum that really does provide emphasis not only on like looking at individuals in deficit, but also in strength-based approach with resilience. Mental health first aid is a curriculum that is utilized for adults, and you can get the facilitation helping you to identify suicidal ideation, how to reduce suicidal attempts, and I'll also definitely get to the point of getting them help. Like I said before, none of these trainings are putting you in the role of trying to be a therapist or to fix anyone's problem, but more along the line, how to identify signs, symptoms of depression, other more mental health that happens to really weigh down on an individual to eventually get them to a referral resource. Youth mental health first aid. Mental health first aid was first created for adults and aimed at all the community, but what they found is there's a difference, right, of youth, and definitely identify some of those differences in getting youth mental health first aid to some of the younger people, adolescents, and children. Reconstructing Resilience is a curriculum. It's a no-cost 3-part virtual series throughout the 2022-2023 school year, focusing on practical ideas and tools that adults can use to support young people in developing the skills, resilience that they need to recover from both the COVID and mental health crises that arise from not only dealing with the pandemic, but for instance, communities that have higher rates of substance misuse and co-occurring mental health disorders. It's real important to focus on resilience and not only just trauma, etc. Samfound.org is a resource that I looked up online. It provides a no-cost suicide prevention training. And any of these curriculums you see, if you go to their website, you can pull up online virtual training for QPR, ASSIST, some of these other entities that if you didn't want to utilize mental health or youth mental health first aid, you can utilize their fundraising to bring that to your community, to your organization, anywhere that you think the training can be helpful in terms of serving the community. Next slide, please. It's important to talk about prevention science. Prevention science really does have several different theories they utilize to measure the implementation of prevention. One particular question I had for prevention is what does it save for dollars in treatment? And I unofficially got a comment one time when I was at the Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration CSAP, Center for Substance Abuse Prevention. I asked some of the administration, what is the current measurement? At one time it was for every dollar you put into prevention, you save $8 worth of treatment. It was 2015, I asked the question that changed to for every dollar you put into prevention, it saves $18 worth of treatment. And I really am a firm believer in prevention initiatives, prevention planning and implementation, especially utilizing culture, intersecting it with several different evidence-based practices. in terms of being proactive rather than reacting to a situation in the terms of the paradigm, the healthcare paradigm of prevention going on to intervention to treatment and postvention. So if you look at the paradigm, implementation of prevention, how does that fit your community? Every community is unique. We're not the same. Every community has different needs. We're not the same. So really planning that and developing some of those implementation planning measures are effective in seeing what fits your community. One particular prevention science EBP is risk and protective factors. Risk factors are characteristics at the biological, psychological, family, community, or cultural level that precede and associated with a higher likelihood of negative outcomes. So essentially what it's saying, if there's more risk factors, there's more down the road, you're going to have more problems. Protective factors are characteristics associated with lower likelihood of negative outcomes or that reduce the risk factor's impact. Protective factors may be seen as positive countering events. So essentially what it's saying is more protective factors, the more likely that risk factors won't impact the future. Next slide, please. And I'd like to say that a lot of this resource information came from the Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration, which is the acronym SAMHSA. So here I got some examples of risk factors. Are those individual and social environmental characteristics associated with an increased likelihood of substance use? The community domain, one of the risk factors that's important to address is community disorganization, and if there's presence of crime or higher crime, that's definitely a community risk factor. Community attitudes and norms towards substance abuse. So if you see like families are open about utilizing alcohol, marijuana, or any other illicit drug that's out there, that definitely that can point to the community, if they're okay with these drugs being in the community, if it's okay for people to utilize alcohol and drugs, that's a risk factor. Availability of illicit drugs in the community is easy for anyone who wants to find drugs or alcohol, is easy to obtain. Socioeconomic factors are such as poverty, financial poverty, looking at having no access to money. The underlying definition of poverty, lack of resources, resources for emotional poverty, spiritual poverty, physical poverty. You can look at it in any different type of lens. That definitely is a risk factor. The family domain is parental monitoring is the parent having access to the child, the adolescent, in terms of monitoring their behavior, the attitude, their thoughts, and who they talk to, who they communicate, who they engage with. And encouragement, is that there? Is that present? Attitudes towards substance abuse, once again, for instance, if a child sees their mother or father utilizing alcohol, they're at risk to maybe down the road get a full-blown alcohol dependency. Poor academic performance, they're not doing well in school. If they need some tutoring, definitely could be something that helps them. That's a risk factor. Peer individual domain is antisocial behavior, not only in terms of being against being social or introverted or out versus outverted, but antisocial behavior in terms of criminal thinking, utilizing people, families, communities to get what you want, breaking rules, individual friends, attitude. Who are the friends? Who's the individual? Are they using vapes already? Are the friends using vapes? That's a risk factor. Attitude, use towards substance use. Attitude or use could be, oh, well, we're just drinking one alcohol drink, or we're using one joint. You know, as well, I know it turns into many. And this data came from the SAMHSA, Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration, National Household Substance Drug Abuse Survey of 1999. Next page, please. I really like to talk about protective factors. There's our features of an individual social environment that increase the likelihood that a juvenile will abstain from substance use. And we can definitely change this not only to juvenile, but to adult, child, individual. Are there religious or spirituality beliefs present? That's a protective factor. Helps reduce the impact any of those risk factors named before can have on individual, family, or community. Is there commitment to school? Is school important? As parents or caretakers really emphasize that education, not only from a K through 12 standpoint, but also post-secondary options, are those something that's talked about as a planned on? Post-secondary options can be anywhere from 2-year technical school options to beauty school to college and tribal college, tribal university to mainstream university planning. I can start early in a child's life and go up into high school, not at 11th and 12th grade, but just talking about it, visiting campuses, being part of the school, the schooling of the child, tutoring, going to parent teacher conferences, exposure to prevention messages in school, class, films, lectures, assemblies, talking about prevention of substance misuse and mental health, just getting that knowledge, that's an excellent protective factor. Family communication, that's really important. One of the practices that I really like to emphasize is having talking circles, giving that Toshka, Tonja, niece or nephew or our child a chance to say, hey, what's on your mind? That really does engage some thoughts and attitudes and beliefs that you would never even thought the adolescent is thinking about, giving them time to communicate. High self-esteem, is that something that's present? Is the adolescent think of themselves and being cared for, or just kind of like love themselves and give them time to have a strong self-esteem about who they are. Coping and problem skills against actions against substance use. Coping problem can be anywhere from learning how to deal with peer pressure, learning how to know how to mitigate anger, identify depression, stress, anxiety, how to address some of these individual coping skills, and how to identify how to reduce that impact that stress, anger, depression can have on an individual. Perceived prevalence for substance abuse. That's something that's really according to is it really prevalent that substance abuse or misuse is present in the individual, the family, or the community. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we have a beautiful picture of a chanchera, in our language, that's what we call a drum. And I think that's real important to talk about that in cultures and community. There's different songs, there's different dances, whether it be social or ceremonial. And that's a huge protective factor. Learning about songs, drum groups, creating drum groups, looking at social songs, ceremony songs in your community, in your indigenous nation, that has been proven and measured to reduce the impact substance misuse and co-occurring mental health have on populations. It's been dubbed an evidence-based best practice. So it's safe to say drumming is really healthy. Cultural protective factors is positive attitude. In my culture, my ceremony, we have a concept of looking at 2 parts of the day. On Petu Luta, we call red day. In the morning, you pray to the morning star. You send your good energy. You talk about to yourself about having good thoughts about the day, knowing that you're going to need some help, letting go of resentment, having forgiveness, loving one another. Whoever you come across your path, you have that compassion, that respect for them. Those are really important values to have. And at the end of the day, when the sun is setting and it's another red part of the day, you give thanks because you acknowledge that ask you did in the morning you walk throughout the day, positive manner, and carrying those different values and beliefs that you've had helped you throughout the day. Attending ceremony, going to ceremony, learning about ceremony, really working with the elders in your community. And that ceremony doesn't just have to be actual like going to a ceremony, but smudging is one of the important ceremonies we can do ourselves. Looking at wiping off some of that daily that trauma, that grief, especially that we carry in our human genome, our DNA sequence, and also spiritually, the impact genocide has on indigenous communities. Daily ceremony, smudging, drumming. Drumming is important. We mentioned that when we first got to the slide. Dancing. There's two types of dancing in my indigenous nation. Ceremony, which would be ceremony dancing, and also attending a wachipi, a powwow, going to a social activity, participating in dancing. That's a cultural protective factor. Being socially connected. How does that look? Human beings, my personal belief, my personal truth is we're interactive. We need to get out and interact with humans. When we're staying in our safe zone and not challenging our comfort levels, then I think that's an issue. Getting out, talking to someone, having coffee with someone, having tea, going for a bike ride, visiting strangers, those are all definitely protective factors in engaging your social inclination to interact as human beings. Parental resilience. Children really do take a kind of knowledge and identify how parents have been resilient in taking care of them, holding the household together, working, paying the bills. Those are really big things that cultural protective factors, and in the culture, it really is important to identify and respect your elders, which are your parents. Whether you have one single parent home, two parents, or you have a caretaker, grandma, grandpa, or auntie, uncle that take care of you, or if you're living in a setting where you have different adults raising you. Talking circles, that's something that you can engage your family in. And I always look at the history of talking circles. And in my community, my indigenous nation, it's said that when we conclude the day, we'd sit around the fire and we would talk about things throughout the day, our planning, how we see our communities in the future in terms of healthiness, how we can create more strengthening resilient factors in terms of communication. How can we strengthen the family, prepare more for the future in terms of our children? And talking circles are a traditional method that's always been in our indigenous nations for hundreds and thousands of years. So how do we engage and how do we create that in our own family is a good question. Cultural connectedness. How do we imagine how our Native American, our indigenous culture is, and engage and bring that back to our communities that can already be in your community? How do you go out and engage in those activities, such as the sweat lodge and EP, other different drumming activities, drum practice, powwow practice, language. There's a lot of language initiatives going on, food sovereignty. There'll be a buffalo hunt in our community tomorrow. How do you get involved in that? That's just kind of something that's important, and it's a protective factor to expose adolescents to any of these bullet points. We could probably go on and on about more, but this is just something I came up with off my mind, is to put on these bullet points. Next page, please. And we'll definitely leave time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. We have about 15 to 20 more minutes. Cultural protective factors for personal wellness. Here I got a picture of our annual celebration, Wachipi, where we celebrate the Wakegli, and that's where we captured the flag of General Custer. If you see in the picture, we celebrate that every year, that our nation was strong enough to come together to protect our wellness, our safety of our children, our women, our nation. And that's why we're so continuing to go forward and our culture is strong today. Personal wellness can be anything from taking care of yourself, eating the right foods, exercising, staying away from substance use, illicit substances like sugar, tobacco, alcohol, drugs, talking to someone, having that someone you trust to share some of your challenges you have in your daily life, going out for a bike ride, going for a walk, anything can help you to be well. Just concentrate on that. That's definitely a good coping skill to have, and it's a cultural protective factor. Positive self-image, loving yourself for who you are. Our communities are traditionally marginalized, and we share that oppression, and we become the oppressors. So unfortunately, what you see in the Indigenous community is that lateral violence, that lateral oppression, holding each other down. Positive self-image starts with yourself, talking about to yourself how you're happy about who you are, holding each other up in the community, recognizing gossip and any type of harmful communication, stopping it where it stops with you. Don't repeat it on, but instead try to change that positive self-image to hold yourself up, to hold each other up. We're in this together. Self-efficacy is something that you can do to make yourself more efficient. Self-efficacy can be anywhere from taking care of who you are as a person, your household, your bills, etc. Working, familial and non-familial connectedness, going out into your family, addressing some of the issues that traditionally have happened in the past, and moving forward in a good way, having that connection in family. And also going out into your community and connecting with community activity. Something I really try to do, go out of my way, participate, and also volunteer at different youth activities like the Boys and Girls Club, etc. Positive opportunities, something we really want to engage and share with our youth. And that's definitely looking at, like I said, education can be one positive opportunity, going to visit college campuses, and just getting together for a feed or something that helps the community in terms of giving your time, your energy, and thinking in terms of being positive. Positive social norms. One time I attended a meeting in the community and it wasn't a good meeting, a lot of hollering, a lot of differences, but debate's healthy. Positive social norms can be communicating in a sense of your voice change, you're just being kind and being socially inclined in terms of listening more than talking. There's other types of social norms you can have, like having that positive attitude towards each other. I found a study, it says in the suicide attempts among American Indian and Alaska Native youth concluded that increasing protective factors was more effective at reducing the probability of a suicide attempt than was decreasing risk factors. So I like to mention that study. Next page, please. Cultural protective factors, resources. Circles of Courage is one of the founding frameworks that's used widely throughout Native America, Indigenous communities. And if you see the picture of what we call the medicine wheel in our language, the Chingleshka, it really does identify 4 components we like to refer to as mind, body, spirit, emotional side. We have a language for that. And also identifies some of our creation story directional colors. A lot of different Indigenous nations have different colors, identifying different points of interest, points of history, and it's very universal and interchangeable. The circles of courage, it starts with the stages of life, the 4 stages of growing up as a child and going into adolescence is the 2nd stage. And then the adult life is the 3rd stage, and then going into your elder years is the 4th stage. So in the 1st stage of circle of courage, belonging, looking at belonging, belonging activities, belonging implementation is going to do exercises. And if you see the second bullet point, gathering Native Americans, the acronym is GONA. That's a newer curriculum that bounces off the framework of Circles of Courage. It's created by Dr. Brokenlake. Belonging, learning how to replace that if you don't feel that you belong. Doing activities, mastery, looking at historical trauma, moving into historical resilience, strength-based focus, not spending too time on trauma, but also looking at it and how that's come a long way through our DNA and through our generations. Independence, becoming an adult, handling life on life's terms, having those strong coping skills, strong communication skills. In the GONA, the Gathering Native Americans, they call it interdependence because of the fact that it's gone a little further and communities hold together and help each other. And that's how they say we're interdependent. Generosity, it's the time to give back. A lot of us are in different stages here, but generosity is volunteering your time, giving of some of the resources you can provide. And I also like to talk about zero suicide, the medicine wheel. I can't bring it up, but I did leave the link there if you want to check it out. They created a curriculum based on this medicine wheel concept. And what it does is it looks at leading and engaging that initiative to change the impact suicide has on the community. And they also identify physical, emotional, spiritual, mental quadrants in the medicine wheel, the colors they also have. And at the center is the individual, the family, and the tribe. Engage, improve, treat, transition into train, and identify resources that really help engage that community to change the impact suicide has on the community. And then Roadmap to Resilience, it's another curriculum that's out there. If you just want to click on that site, it's a free curriculum. You can look at it. The website it really does look at resiliency. We really want to talk about resilience because we're not spending enough time on that strength base. We're strong people. We come from a lot. We've been through a lot. That deficit is there, not looking at a deficit lens, but looking at it more of identifying those strengths that already exist in individuals, families, and communities. And how do we emphasize and bring that out into the community, especially identifying, looking at brain science, looking at the lens of what Western education theories, sciences, and intersecting that with our culture. I believe, indigenous people have always been scientists. And what we've been doing for thousands and thousands of years has worked to get us to this point, to be resilient, to get through all the genocide, all the trauma that happened to our people. We're still here and we're still resilient. Next page, please. Individuals' readiness to change, stages of change, also known as the trans-theoretical model. I think this is important as we go into the next few slides. We're going to talk about community readiness. Individual readiness, pre-contemplation, is when someone is utilizing substances and has co-occurring mental health challenges. They're unaware of how these two untreated factors are harming or impacting their lives, their employment, etc. Contemplation is when they start to begin to identify how substance misuse and mental health can impact their life. And then preparation is saying, okay, we do know that substance misuse and mental health impacts my life. So how do we go about taking that first steps and to change it? And that's where action comes in. Taking that step, reducing your substance misuse, reducing the impact mental health has, and learning about how to basically treat those two. And then maintenance is everyday recovery work. A lot of us are in maintenance stage where we're doing something every day to make sure we identify relapse, we identify positive attitude versus pessimistic non-positive attitudes, how to change those thought processes into having more of a positive outlook on life, essentially helping ourselves to help others, be kind to each other. Next page, please. As we move forward, community readiness model, it really does assess the community's readiness for change, increasing community capacity for suicide prevention, creating a climate that makes healthy community change possible. You define the community, you conduct key respondent interviews, score to determine readiness level, you develop strategies, conduct workshops, and create community change. So any of these steps are really identified in what's called the CRM, the community readiness model. We'll go to the next stage or next page, sorry. Community readiness model is the mention of readiness for suicide prevention. You can't just jump into suicide prevention. This model here has been measured to be effective in terms of what steps do we take and to implement some of the suicide prevention into our community. And a lot of different grants do support and do also require that you do a CRM in the community to gauge what step is necessary where your community sits in terms of readiness for change. Key factors that influence your community's preparedness to take action on suicide prevention are community efforts, community knowledge of efforts, leadership, community climate, community knowledge about the issue, resources related to the issue. We have the hand raised, so we'll stop right here.
Thank you, Toshka. This is Ethelene again. I was wondering, I think it might be helpful if people knew where they could get the training or facilitation of community readiness training for their community.
Yeah, I was gonna put the link in the, I do see the SAMHSA. If you look in the chat, I put SAMHSA Tribal Training Technical Assistance Center. That's one resource where you can access technical assistance for free. It's completely paid for. What happens if you put in a request, you can request for this free facilitation, and we hire our own facilitators to come in and do this facilitation with the community. Also, there's other resources such as the Tribal Youth Resource Center that has access to some of these free facilitations on traumatic stress. I think the National Children's Traumatic Stress Network also has some Native American trauma facilitation resources that you can find. I also put soundfound.org, all these different evidence-based practice suicide prevention models and theories. You can access that for free and utilize soundfound.org to pay for the trainings in the community. It's a great question. And once again, the SAMHSA Tribal Training Technical Assistance Center, we have several different training facilitations. We try to refrain from the word training because we're not the experts in the community. We're more of the facilitators. We come in and we facilitate that dialogue, that movement. We acknowledge there's experts in the community, and we want to highlight that. What are those strength-based experts, resilient factors in the community? How can we get them to engage? Maybe they're not being engaged, maybe they're underutilized in the community, those resources. So definitely a community readiness model can be accessed for your community. What does it look like? It can be on-site, it can be virtual. So what SAMHSA does is identify if you're a SAMHSA grantee, like Native Connections, GLS grantee, suicide prevention grantee, you would be what's called focused TA technical assistance. And then if you're a non-SAMHSA grantee, you still have access, and there's still funding to provide that facilitation on the ground. And that's more of a broad focus, which is good. And there's also an intensive TA, intensive technical assistance that really helps with identifying communities that have a higher rate of the impact substance misuse and mental health have on the community. So that definitely is something to recognize and utilize these resources. Yeah, that's it right there. The link is shared in the chat there. So. Does that answer your question too? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was going to mention that I think this part of it is really, really critical to addressing any kind of real sensitive issue like suicide prevention. for example, whenever I was directing a SAMHSA grant in my community, then we set up a meeting with, we call them stakeholders, but they're programs, behavioral health, different schools in our community. And we invited community, and some of the community members were really angry and they were really upset about the response or the lack of response from service providers. And there was a comment made by one of the service providers that they were set up by having this gathering and inviting community, and they felt like they were attacked. So that was a really challenging a type of issue to address, right on the spot. But thankfully, we were able to, I guess, kind of calm the waters, and we were able to, I guess, really reassure people that, they weren't set up, the service providers, but also we also needed to hear from the community, regardless of what they were expressing, because the anger, the grief, all of that is a natural part of doing this work, and we have to anticipate it. So the community readiness, I think, is such a critical factor in preparing to do this kind of work. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, Queen Auntie. Really, thank you for sharing that, because I think highly traumatized communities haven't identified that unresolved grief or the unresolved trauma. And I think one of the ways to communicate is in anger, is in raising your voice, and that's common, right? So how do we gauge that community in terms of what is ready to change, just like the stages of change? How do we move to that point of identifying that there is an issue? And like you said, the community already said there's an issue, and they're not happy with no one doing nothing about it. And I think it takes people such as yourself, Anthony, to really be invested and care about the community, and get to these different resources out there to the people. Because when you try to change one thing by yourselves, it's not going to work. It takes a community to change. And when the community is not ready to change, then how do we move them to that point of being ready to change? Next slide, please. Community readiness model and the different stages of community awareness or no awareness, denial, or resistance that there's an issue in the community. Vague awareness, pre-planning, preparation, initiation, stabilization, confirmation, expansion, high level of community ownership. So I don't want to spend too much time because we're already running out of time, but I do want to recognize these different stages of community awareness and how it can work and change. And I see a lot of people online could probably provide a pretty much good example of what this can, what stage their community is in terms of issues like I talked about. How much risk factors are present? How much parents let their children see using substances, and that's going to be a problem down the road, right? It's gonna really impact the adolescent. And how do we engage those protective factors? Is there denial that some of these risk factors are even prevalent in the community? Is there resistance that, oh, we don't need to change, everything's okay? My personal thoughts are, no, we're in a crisis. Any suicide that's happening, and I really like zero suicide outlook. No suicide is where we want to get to in terms of and having that community have the ownership of that. Next slide, please. We've got a few more minutes and then we'll move into Q&A. Youth mental health first aid is a great tool to utilize. And like I said, it can be accessed for free. Some of the resources in the chat, if you want that in your community or your organization, you can request that resource and it can be brought to your community no charge, at no charge. It's designed to teach parents, family members, caregivers, teachers, school staff, peers, neighbors, health and human service workers, and other caring citizens how to help an adolescent age 12 to 18 who is experiencing mental health or addiction challenges or is in a crisis. Youth mental health first aid is primarily designed for adults who regularly interact with youth or young people. The course introduces common mental health challenges for youth, reviews typical adolescent development, teaches 5-step action plan for how to help young people in both crisis, non-crisis situations. Topics covered include anxiety, depression, substance use disorders in which psychosis may occur, disruptive behavior disorders, including AD/HD, and eating disorders. And here's the website if you want to look it up. If you want to become a trainer yourself, or you can go out and do this training in the community, that's available. And it's important that I emphasize again, we're not the therapist, we're not the professional. We want to engage these curriculums, these evidence-based best practices, learn about them, how to identify signs, how to get someone to the help or refer them to that professional clinical help. Next slide, please. Informs adults about common mental health concerns among youth. It reduces the stigma that may happen to be present with having mental health challenges. Teaches adults how to recognize signs and symptoms of mental health and substance use problems in youth. Provides adults with skills to use 5-step action plan to help youth who may be facing mental health problem or crisis, such as suicide. Next slide, please. And we're going to move into the 5-step action plan. Help offered to a young person experiencing mental health challenge, mental health disorder, mental health crisis. The first aid is given until appropriate help is received or until a crisis is de-escalated. Again, that's what we're mentioning is how to get them to appropriate help. Next page, please. This is the acronym ALGE. And it's also in the mental health first aid action plan and the youth mental health first aid action plan. It's important to recognize ALGE is assessed for risk or suicide or harm, listen non-judgmentally, give reassurance and information, encourage professional help, encourage self-help and other support strategies. Self-care as a first aid is important. So ALGE really does, if you look at the end, self-care as first aid is important. That's that secondary traumatic stress that we can engage. Knowing about someone else's trauma, we can absorb that trauma. They call it secondary or vicarious traumatization. Self-care is really important. We can't help each other if we're not helping ourselves. Another way to say that is the blind leading the blind. We really need to take care of ourselves, acknowledge, find these resources and make sure we can share those resources with community and individuals and families. So next slide, please. I think we're going to the end of the presentation. Questions, comments, or feedback. We want to make sure we have time for anyone to share. I see quite a few chats in the chat box there. Do you have any questions, comments, or feedback? Sarah asked can we get a copy of the links and maybe a reference for the study mentioned on the last slide? Thank you for this presentation. Yes, definitely. We have numerous PDFs for cultural protective factors, the Gathering of Native Americans curriculum, fact sheet. We also have community readiness model curriculum we're going to send out in the email. That's all in PDF too. So let's see the question. Please share your questions in the Q&A. Also want to recognize my good colleague and I want to say my uncle Gary Newman. He shared the great resources. Gary's a great mentor of mine. I really enjoyed working with Gary and learn a lot when I partner and collaborate with Gary. He mentioned the Guide to Live to See the Great Day that dawns. It's a publication. It's free. SAMHSA prevention, suicide prevention. He did include the resource, the link. So please feel free to click on that. There's tons of stuff on that one. So, and then the TTA Center, we did include the link there, and that's a free resource to everyone. If you want to check that page out, please check it out. We send out enough time to go over the different resources, so we want to make sure you have access to the links and also the PDFs. So we have pretty much a few more minutes for Q&A, and we just want to leave some time. Yeah.
There's a comment in the Q&A box. I'll go ahead and read it. Not a question. I just want to express my gratitude for the additional information and your words, experiences, Leon. Wopila Tanka to the TYRC for putting on the event. Doksha, and it's from Toshka Isaac Yellowbank from the Winnebago Tribal Youth Program.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. He's a good friend of mine, good brother of mine. Appreciate you guys coming on. We have a question for closing. Do you want to do a closing, Tui, Ethelene, or do you feel comfortable?
Sure, I can do that. Just want to make sure that people take a deep breath, kind of debrief from this, all this information. You're going on to the next part of your day, and maybe some of this has, raised some questions or issues, some feelings, some memories. And if those are hurtful or painful memories, I encourage you to take a deep breath, to go outside, sit on the ground if you can. Unchima Ka, Grandmother Earth, is always there to help with her healing energy, or to talk with somebody, to reach out. You can reach out to us also. And I know that all of us on our circle of relatives at the Tribal Youth Resource Center would be glad to respond to you, assist any way we can. But with that, I'll go ahead and do the closing. And Wopila Kanka, thank you everybody for your participation. Tukashila na unchi daku iwongla kapi ki oya kapi chaslawaya. Wopila Kanka tukashila na unchi na daku imongla kapi ki oya kapi tokata kya kecha wakaja tiwahe tioshpai ki wash ake woke etan ichupite unshi unkilapie mitakuye oyasi. Wopila, thank you.
Oh, Tui, thank you for that. While you were doing the beautiful closing, we had a question come up. What is the best way to put a suicide prevention assembly for students 5th to 12th grade without showing them links? Because that makes me feel like I didn't do enough to give good info on this topic. Like I said, you can request anytime to the TA Center for us to come in and do Gathering Native Americans curriculum. Any of the CRM stuff, it's free. You can request that. We do plenty of those facilitations across the nation in schools. One recent one before the pandemic, we did a whole middle school Gathering Native Americans. And we were supposed to do the high school next, but the pandemic happened. Those are free. We could come in and help with that. We can do it online too, if that's one of the things you want to consider. My good mentor, Gary, he put on a lot of communities, work with their youth to write down, how do you know you are heard by an adult? And the answers are very informative. Another school put up a map of the campus on the wall and left it up for 2 weeks, and youth went by, put an X on where bullying happened, and the staff used this to help prevent bullying on school campus. That's huge. I think bullying really does add to the suicidal ideation that can happen out there, and sometimes that youth don't want to share that they're being bullied.
Toshka,
Yeah.
I'd just like to add to your response to the question about the assembly for 5th to 12th grades. What is appropriate way to do that, you know, a helpful way. And I agree, Stefan, I think your name is, or maybe I'm pronouncing that wrong, about, you know, just showing them links and leaving it at that. I think this is a very sensitive subject. So I would suggest having a smaller group, not having a large assembly, but having smaller groups like talking circles to really, you know, share about the information and to ask if there's any feedback and give them that opportunity. Do some like energizers and debriefing activities as part of it. And if there's, and have a way to, for the youth to reach out anonymously or, you know, individually, have some contacts for them to do that, because this is, again, it's a very sensitive subject. So I would suggest that. And like Toshka Leon said, you know, we do have number of resources, including the Tribal Youth Resource Center, the SAMHSA Tribal TTA Center also has, you know, resources that can help develop that. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I never really knew about those resources, Tuli, until I went out and out of my comfort zone and did an internship at SAMHSA. And that was part of my SMART plan, was to what resources are there for tribal nations, indigenous communities. And I was like, wow, we really need these resources in our community. And I think that's huge, because not a lot of people know these are all free. They're all free resources. The funding's there for the TA centers to come in and do the facilitations and to help with mitigation, and also creating plans of change is most important. Like the community readiness model, I really like that model because it helps to gauge the measurement of what we can do, what's possible. I appreciate you too, Gary. You're always I always do look up to you and increase that my own knowledge of how to work with communities. Gary also highlighted the importance of being a mentor to a mentee, especially a youth in your community. That's something I try to do a lot, volunteer, talk to youth, and just kind of be that ultimate presence. I grew up in substance misuse, and I never seen a sober male role model. So I try to strive to be that for my nephew. My nephew was born, and I always wanted to be that person for him. So thank you, everyone.